we kind of evaluate somewhat unconsciously what is useful to us and what we prefer to project out into the world. So we have a lot of dormant ego states that don't fit for us because we don't like them or they're uncomfortable for us. But if you recognize that you can access them, rightly or wrongly, good or bad, if you want to, then you're not really pretending to be somebody else. You're basically just accessing a part of you that lies dormant. You just have to kind of put it into context.
What's up, everyone? I'm Zach, and welcome to the Auxoro podcast, which is inspired by, but not limited to, the curiosity of myself. Whether I speak with doctors, designers, athletes, or music artists, the goal is to improve my own way of thinking and hopefully help others think better themselves. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you'd like to keep up with all things Auxoro, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to our twice-monthly newsletter. In this action-packed email, we send you the latest Auxoro content, as well as articles, podcasts, books, shows, and other content we find exciting and useful. Go to auxoro.com or visit the link in the podcast description to join over 1,000 others who get the newsletter. Also, you can now support Auxoro on Patreon for $2, $5, or $10 per month. On Patreon, you get early access to all podcast episodes, discounts on merch, and one Patreon-exclusive episode each month. We're an independent platform with no outside investors, and we rely on listeners like you to keep the conversation going. Go to patreon.com/Auxoro to become a patron, and thank you for your support. This time, I sit down with Dr. Taylor Burrows, an expert lifestyle, dating, and relationship consultant. She has a PhD in marriage, couples, and family counseling, and was in clinical practice as a licensed mental health professional for 14 years. She's now retired and works as an independent consultant. I first came across Dr. Burrows on Twitter and found her relationship advice to be fascinating. As a guy, I've been hesitant in the past to go to women for advice about women. But Dr. Burrows completely proved me wrong on that. No matter where you're at in your life, whether you're single, married, or dating, this conversation can apply to you. She is an absolute relationship Jedi. So without further ado, please enjoy this deep dive with Dr. Taylor Burrows. Thank you, first of all, for taking the time to hop on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. I like to do podcasts from time to time. So it was a good timing. Sometimes they happen back to back, which is always a bit exhausting.
Yeah. And just doing podcasts so often, I feel like I figure stuff out sometimes when I'm saying them out loud. I don't know if you have the same feeling, but I'll be just saying something in the middle of a podcast and I wasn't really planning on getting to a certain conclusion, and for whatever reason, just saying stuff out loud, even if it's kind of bullshit, sometimes I'll be like, hey, I never really thought about that before in that way.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think that's entrepreneurship or whatever you want to call it in a nutshell, just learning as you go, but not like in a sort of chaotic way, but just it's an organic process, and you have to have that growth mindset to really leverage it.
Yeah. So you are a lifestyle, dating, and relationship coach, but I thought a good place to start that may be a bit unconventional is film, because I heard you mention in past interviews that you had done some acting.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one moment you mentioned in particular, I think it was on the podcast with Zuby, that you had a moment where you thought that you felt like yourself for the first time in a long time when you were working on a film or you were on camera. And I was wondering for you, what was it about film that made you feel like you were yourself?
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience having given it up for so long, because I started as a young girl, on the stage. I started acting and doing beauty pageants and dancing and all of that stuff. And then when I don't remember how I started to develop a specific desire to want to act. And I guess modeling came up first. And I was in the Cayman Islands. And so then I moved to the States. I went to Miami and got an agent and a manager and did the whole like rounds of castings and stuff. But I did film classes, like film acting classes and everything. But then I gave all that up sometime in high school because it was just too taxing on, like, it took away from school and it took my mom away from work and her job was in jeopardy. So I just decided, I'm only getting like little things here and there and it's really stressful, and getting food on the table is more important, you having your job, than me running me around for all these castings. So we kind of came to a decision that we would stop and I would focus on school. So I never really got back to it until I moved back to Cayman, which is interesting how it happened, but it was kind of like a random, I don't know, announcement on Facebook or something, looking for a girl with this kind of look, this kind of age, for this short film.
Like a casting call?
Yeah. And I just kind of threw my hat in there and read for the part, and it felt so familiar. And I was excited by the opportunity, and it worked out. And it was really cool because what I didn't realize was along the way, I learned so much through my profession about that, like how to be empathic, how to connect with, my emotions. And I basically became a better actress through my professional career. Because that sounds weird, I know, but I don't.
No, I get that. I get that.
Okay, so when I was younger, I guess the best way to explain it is it was acting. It was like putting it on, like I was reading some fake person's words. Whereas after learning how to really connect with people, strangers, and put things together for them using my insights and connecting with theirs, I learned how to really sort of absorb a perspective of the character in a way that would transform myself. and so then it was cool because it was a lot of fun, but I felt like I really improved. And it was, at the time, I was going through a lot, right? So it was a nice sort of refresh, reset button that reconnected with parts of myself that I had forgotten a long time about. And it helped me come full circle to where I am now. But I wouldn't turn down a role if it was like an awesome opportunity and it was appropriate given everything else going on in my life now. But it's definitely not something I would want to pursue to take me away from what's meaningful to me now.
Yeah, I've never done any sort of acting, but I've always thought it's incredible how people are able to transform on camera and adopt other personas that are often written by other people. So you're kind of just figuring it out as you go. And I've always felt super uncomfortable on camera. Like even sometimes when we film the in-person podcast, it's the camera's kind of in the background. And then one of my friends recommended to me, he said, why don't you film yourself talking about some topics, just looking at the camera? And I thought that would be so easy. And then I set my iPhone up to do it. I'm looking in the camera and I'm like, this feels so fucking weird. Like how am I supposed to be myself on camera? So I couldn't imagine trying to be someone else in that environment. That seems crazy to me.
Well, here's a little tidbit if ever comes up again, or just in general for those listeners out there that may have some kind of tinkering with film or acting or anything media oriented. The best way to sort of merge that with psychology, which is my training and background, there's a theory called ego state theory. And I can't really explain it in a proper way that's going to be bite-sized right now. But let's just say ego state theory kind of says there's an infinite amount of different personalities, but not like we're all dissociative and have multiple personalities, but just little ego states that are basically like moods or perspectives. And we shift in and out of them depending on what the context is or what our mood is at the time, what like our motivations are, our intentions are. So you're kind of like thinking about how you are at work versus how you are with your friends versus how you are with your parents and stuff like that. And so we kind of evaluate somewhat unconsciously what is useful to us and what we prefer to project out into the world. So we have a lot of dormant ego states that don't fit for us because we don't like them or they're uncomfortable for us. But if you recognize that you can access them, rightly or wrongly, good or bad, if you want to, then you're not really pretending to be somebody else. You're basically just accessing a part of you that lies dormant. You just have to kind of put it into context.
I totally get that. That's funny because that makes me think about dating in New York City. I'm single. I'm 26 years old, and I'm seeing sometimes maybe one date, 2 dates a week. I try to fit them into my schedule where I'm meeting up with someone once a week and I may meet with a few different people a month just to get to know them. And I love not so much for the casual hookups anymore, like in college where it's like a one night stand, but more of like a deep relationship. But it's not monogamous at this point. Like I may just be at a deeper level with 2 or 3 different women at once. But when I'm with certain women, I feel like they bring out different parts of my personalities. Like I'm not really faking it, but it's just more like for whatever reason, they just hit a certain chord in me when I'm talking to them. And it maybe brings out more of like my creative side or something. And then if I'm sitting down across from a girl that is like an engineer and went to MIT, I might be thinking more analytically or like I don't feel like I'm necessarily trying to conform to them, but it's things that kind of get awoken in me depending on who I'm talking to, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. It makes complete sense to me. And they're going to draw out parts of you that are going to mirror certain qualities and complement other qualities, right? So it's this fluid dance that you have with people, right? In relationships of any sort, at least if they're meaningful, if they have like a high vibration, whether positive or negative, for getting esoteric, like if it's a positive energy internally that this person has, then it's going to bring out, positive elements to you in different ways, but it can also be bad and they can seem like more of a toxic person that brings out really bad things inside from inside of you out there into your behavior.
Hey guys, I wanted to interrupt this episode real quick to let you know that Auxoro also produces a short form podcast called The Aux. The Aux brings you a daily dose of uncensored wisdom to jumpstart your life. 10 minutes or less, no bullshit, no topic off limits. You can subscribe to the show by searching The Aux, AUX, wherever you listen to podcasts. For all the latest Auxoro content, you can follow us on Instagram at Auxoro, Twitter at AuxoroMag, and hit us up for our twice monthly newsletter with the link in the podcast description. Now, back to the episode. And I've even felt like, depending on the age of the person that I happen to be with at the time, that kind of brings out different motivations in me as well. So a few months ago, what kind of started as a joke. So we were basically sitting together, me and a couple other my guy friends, and I extended the age range on the dating app that I use, Hinge, from 21 to 36, just to like fuck around and see what happened. And it kind of started as a joke. And I actually matched with some women that I thought were pretty attractive and they seemed interesting. So I ended up going on dates with some women that were 5 or 6 years older than me. I think the oldest was 34. And before that, I had been only dating people around my age. But then when I was sitting across from them, I kind of felt like I had to get my shit together more because they were just they were at like a different point in life. Like I had taken out girls before that ranging from like 22 to 26, 27. And when you're right out of college, you kind of have that vibe like, oh, like what's money? Like as long as we have each other, like it's all fine. And then once you get to a certain age, it's kind of like, what do you do? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Like this is how I like to fuck. And I'm just like, oh my God, like that is it kind of made me want to like level my game up sitting across from some of these women.
Yeah, I could see that too. What an interesting experiment you have going on there. So, I mean, some of it's entertainment, but a lot of it is just learning about yourself, right? Experiencing things. And, as if you want to call me a dating coach, I work a lot with men, and it is an important stage of self development and just the dating process to recognize those elements about yourself that you like, and those elements about other people that you like. So you can compare and contrast and then sort of choose where you want to land, right?
Yeah.
So I do think it's good to have that experience, and it depends on the person how long it lasts. But yeah, when I work with men or women, basically, but like I said, I have mostly men. Majority of my clients are men, so I tell them, basically, you have to date ethically. So if you're going to not be monogamous, meaning you're dating multiple people, potentially sexually active with multiple people, because you're not in a serious relationship, for men, just at least approach those dates or those people openly and transparently so that they know that you're not monogamous or not committing to them sexually.
Yeah, and I didn't mean experimental in sort of like a disposable way. I meant it more just like something I had never really had an open mind about before, and then I was having genuine connections with people that I never thought I would. But that brings up a good point. So for someone, say, you're single and you're seeing multiple people at once, and it's a non-monogamous situation, what are some of the things that define a healthy non-monogamous situation as opposed to something that can turn into a downward spiral?
Well, I approach it differently for men and women. When I work with women, I basically advise them to only be monogamous, only be exclusive, to have be sexually active in an exclusive, committed relationship, and that is up to them, right? If they say, I'm not going to agree to that, I'm happy with sexual activity that's more casual, then I don't mind working with them. It's not that it's a deal breaker, but I believe it's healthier for women to only have sex in exclusive relationships, if that makes sense.
Is that because of just how men and women react to sex differently?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of social norming and just, how healthy relationships end up working the best, ideally. I function on that sort of horizon. So we strive for the ideal situation. And if we fall a little short, we can make the best of it. But ultimately, I want to give you the best possible outcome. So if I catch a young woman, it's even better. But a lot of the women that I do end up working with are older, who have made a lot of mistakes, learned a lot from what didn't work, and are now trying to do things differently. So they've obviously maybe lived by the whole, casual sex thing is cool, or college years of freedom and excess. And so now they're trying to, well, not just that, but then maybe they got married or they had kids or they were just kind of hopping around in a few different relationships. And now they're ready to settle down and really step away from their career mindset and focus on domesticity. And so that's a whole different treatment plan, basically, if I can call it that, even though I'm not, even though I'm retired, I still function along a lot of those models. But
it could be a retroactive prescription.
Yeah. So for women, it's different. And when I talk to men, a lot of men are not necessarily sexually active with multiple people. They're just dating. So the most important thing that I've found has been, basically effective with men is the mindset. And so knowing that they don't need to put the women on the pedestal, and they shouldn't, that they have the upper hand, and they have to identify what they bring to the table. Like, what is it that they are offering? Like, what is their value? And they don't have to sort of beg for attention or affection or any of that, that they have an abundance, big pool of women that they have to obviously sieve through. So the vetting process is really, it's long and it's stressful and whatever, but there are women out there that are going to be interested in you, and they're going to be better suited. They're going to be just generally, more pleasant and attractive women out there. So don't just accept unpleasant women who basically take advantage of you, friend zone you, all of that sort of stuff. So really focusing on that internal confidence, that mindset shift where you see yourself as the prize and you focus on all your assets, what you have going for you personally and professionally. And basically, it's like the peripheral vision is just how else do you use your free time? Yeah. Okay. So you want to meet people and making sure that that doesn't take like too much focus from your life.
I definitely went through a huge shift in mindset from 18 years old to around 23, 24 years old. When I was 18, I basically went through a rough breakup in college. And then as a reflex from that, I kind of got into the whole pickup artist, like the pickup artistry world. And I read this book called The Game that you've probably heard about. And just it like felt really disconnected from the sex and the deep connection. Like I felt like I was more trying to put notches in my belt for a while. Like I really wasn't pursuing women to have a deep connection with them. And I think a lot of the pickup artistry is kind of toxic looking back on it now, because one of the mainstays, I guess you'd say, is negs, where you're basically giving backhanded compliments to women to try to like get them to, like, it's like this manipulation of a power dynamic where you're trying to get them to prove themselves to you. And I like talking shit, but out in the open. Like I don't really disguise it anymore as like these backhanded sort of compliments, because that to me just feels kind of shitty to do to someone. And then I kind of grew out of that once college hit. And yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't actually know the history of the development of PUA. I know some of the big names out there and whatnot, but if they were any way knowledgeable about psychology and women's psychology, they would know that not only do you access their hindbrain, which is the benefit of doing that, but you're also going to access the bad part, right? Which is that neurotic insecurity. And so the more you sort of press that button, the more you're really letting out women's demons. Because when they start to lose a grasp on feeling secure and trusting, they spin out of control. And whether you're around for that effect or you're not, you're basically unraveling a lot of women who are going to be internalizing all these insecurities. And it's kind of like, what is that fable about the crying wolf? There's a little boy that...
the boy who cried wolf.
Yes. And I've used that term before, because you say things that aren't true in a way that it's like a realistic sarcasm. And the person's like, are you joking or are you not joking? And they don't know. And then they think that it was not a joke, and it stays with them. And it really sort of, it gnaws at a person's, basically develops anxiety and rumination in their brain, right? So you don't really want to go around triggering people that in that way that you're having sex with. That's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, no. And I definitely started to realize that as just my interactions were, the repercussions of it were becoming more apparent.
Right.
And I guess the reason why it attracted me so much, the kind of pickup artist mindset, is because it's kind of sold as this way to not be needy or possessive, like the abundance mentality, but in a more unhealthy way where you're not really connecting to people. So now I feel like even though I'm still not in a monogamous relationship, I want to be monogamous, but I also feel like just having an abundance mentality while also making deep connections with other people is making me less needy and possessive. I don't really feel as jealous as long as I'm being upfront.
Definitely. And you're still young, so that's the thing, is it's a developmental correlate for men and women, but in different ways, right? So for you, you're not there yet. You're still in the exploratory phase of your development. And I was listening to a podcast like a couple of weeks ago, and I don't remember who it was, but they were talking about business and how they separated it into an experimental and exploration phase, and then the exploitation phase, which I thought was interesting, and how older people tend to, when you're younger, you explore and experiment. And then as you get older, you basically choose all of the things that make life most efficient and better. Instead of trying to sort of like flail about and have more variety, you kind of center in on the food you like, the restaurants you enjoy, the tools that make your life easier, and you exploit it. So you become more redundant and repetitive with those options. You might have a couple of things, but that's why people settle down eventually, is because we become more simplified rather than broad in our perspective. So you're still at that stage, so that makes sense. But you will start to shift when it'll be more uncomfortable to diversify your intimacy. And as that happens, you'll end up settling on the one you like best.
Oh yeah, I already feel that kind of happening in certain ways. Because I know for a fact that getting to know someone emotionally, physically, mentally, just making deep connections with the same person is way better and feels more fulfilling than trying to do that with so many different people at once and kind of tricking yourself into like, I'm going to do this the rest of my life. And I already feel that kind of internal shift where that's a place that I want to be. I feel that as a stable, like a more stable environment and something that's more conducive to being a man, I guess, in a sense.
Absolutely. You're right. I agree with you. And you can build on to something that is more consistent and stable. So I know there's like back and forth, there's debate about, no, that's not true. When you have no commitment to anyone, you can focus more on your work and your wealth and all that sort of stuff. But if you talk to or listen to a lot of the really successful people, they're usually coupled, whether they're married or not, and they're in some kind of domestic relationship, and they're able to make their lives very time efficient because the way that they divide the roles and how they're able to really sort of hunker down on basically free time activities, family priorities, travel, all that sort of stuff, rather than spinning their wheels trying to chase down women to have closeness and intimacy.
Yeah, I get that. I can see if guys are saying that they think that being able to date multiple people at once will save them time, or just having casual hookups without the intimate connection will save them time. Just like all that time spent traveling and the money and all the extra bullshit that comes with that eats into your time as well. And having a deep connection with just one or two people, a few people, you're not really just going out and hooking up with whoever. I definitely feel like I have way more time. And it also, like I was kind of saying before, it makes you think about the future and, okay, I need to think about where I want to be in 5 years. If there are kids in the equation, like how am I going to support them? Like all this kind of stuff that you think about. I think it makes me want to be better in a sense.
Yeah, well, I think the best, most positive form of being well, I can't say being a man because I'm not a man, but my understanding and my
you can identify as a man for this podcast.
We don't want to go there. It'll be like the next Zuby phenomenon. But from my professional understanding of the genders, right, as a psychological professional, the most positive form of masculinity is when he has that paternal element where he's the head of the household, where he has children and he's with them, he's living with them, and he's bringing them up and teaching them and protecting them and providing for them. Because now, people are not just today, but recently in modern times, like people feel that you can be a strong father figure, even if you have multiple baby mamas and separate households and whatever. And I don't I don't agree with that. I think that ultimately that lacks the integrity that a fully developed man in his element will have a monogamous family unit.
Yeah, and you'll be broke if you have 4 babies. I don't remember which receiver had like 8 kids, but I'm sure he was paying a lot in child support.
I'm sure. And the thing is too, not just all these other benefits of family life, or I mean, I'm not really a trad person, but I'm more towards the traditional values and conservative end of things. But I think that for men, you're going to also be able to tap into your personal development. Ideally, like it's going to challenge you, and for women as well, right? For all of us, as we develop and grow and mature, we do refine ourselves, like all the little neuroses and the just sort of all the kinks and weaknesses and the imperfections and the flaws. We can really tease them out and resolve them in a long-term relationship. Whereas when you're just sort of meeting people casually, you don't have to address any of those things. You can just, have fun, and then that's it. You move on to the next person. So if they don't like how you do X or Y, or, you don't make the bed, or you don't clean the dishes, or you nitpick about everything or nag, then you just move on. There's no attachment.
Yeah, I agree. Something that I wanted to get into is men taking the lead. And I think guys listening to this podcast will be interested in men taking the lead, whether they're in relationships or they're single and dating. I was wondering, for you, are there any recent or standout moments where you were with a guy and he took the initiative on a date, or maybe planning something, like something that stood out that really made you feel attracted to him? Because I think every single guy, his ideal date is like, oh, I want to be the man. Like, I want to have it all planned out and kind of like crush the date and set the tone. Like, what is there anything that stands out in your mind?
Sure. Well, personally, I'm in a relationship, and my boyfriend, when we were starting out, like vetting each other, we were long distance. So it was quite difficult at first for about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 months or longer, and getting to know each other. And then the times when he would take the lead that were stood out the most to me is he was very decisive and told me what was going to happen. There wasn't all this discussion or whatever. He just would say, so here's what's going to happen. I'm going to come to Miami and we're going to spend some time together and da 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 da.
Would he say that? Would he say like, here's what's going to happen? Or would he say it just like say this is going to happen? Or would he actually use the words, here's what's going to happen?
Here's my idea.
Okay.
And the thing is that there was a lot of lead up to that. So it's not like completely out of the blue. You don't want to sort of hit somebody over the head with something totally unexpected. So he built it up as well with the tension and the comfort and all of that, sort of flirting and stuff like that over the course of some time. So then by the time he said it, it was like I was waiting, I was waiting for him to say it. And then he made the call. And that's also in the reverse. What I advise with women is to be more receptive and to not try to lead. So at the same time as you teach and recommend men in ways of how to take the lead, it's also important for women to be able to not lead, because now feminism has really influenced women to be more assertive and powerful and strong-minded, which are good qualities in context, right? Because when you put two headstrong people together, it's just a power struggle. So that's what I have to do when I'm working with actual couples. And I have to sort of deconstruct the way that they have been functioning and put them back together in a way that the woman doesn't feel like she's marginalized or disempowered, but she basically steps down from that power struggle and allows the man to lead, not because he needs her permission, but because she can either fight with him or she can just let him lead, if you know what I mean.
There are some women that see being led as a weakness, because I would say that's also kind of a strength on its own. If you kind of have to submit yourself and swallow your ego a little bit to let someone else lead you. So it may not be the most masculine form of energy, but being led, I still see as something that takes strength to do.
Definitely. And there are elements of that in both in the reverse, right? So when a masculine man who's of value, a good man with integrity and power, he's able to also have mentors, right? He can take instruction really well. He's disciplined. That's why there's more men in militaries as well, right? So it's interesting how there's a masculine version of these qualities and a feminine version of these qualities, but they can exist in either or, men or women.
Leading is something that I've been trying to work on, especially in the dating scene, because there's so many questions. I think it's something that I've been trying to combat is when a woman asks me, where do you want to eat tonight? To not ask her back, like just be like, we're going here at this time. I'll see you there. And 99% of the time, that's the end of the conversation. But before, it would kind of go back and forth for a while and it would kind of lose energy, or maybe we wouldn't even end up meeting up. But I've been trying to work on just being more decisive, like you were saying, planning out dates and having everything ready to go and say, this is what we're doing. Like not to the point where I don't want her input, but just to have a plan ready to go.
Right. And this is where men need to just clarify what leadership means. Leadership does not mean controlling, right? That's the confusion, and that's what got us into this mess to begin with by the reaction from feminism, right? So you don't need to go so far as to control A to Z factors, right? You lead it. Like the leader doesn't do everything. The leader doesn't micromanage. The leader guides and creates a direction and has the deciding factor of the dynamic. But there's still flexibility and there's still discourse and there's still complementarity and energy that flows both ways. So that's where a lot of the confusion comes from. And a lot of men feel performance anxiety, or just generally like they're worried about having to be perfect and how to set up the date so that, it impresses her so much and nothing can go wrong or whatever. And they get caught up in that. But you don't need to do that. In fact, it's much better to be more organic and have a more open-ended sort of idea. But yeah, you want to have some sort of cool ideas in your back pocket so that you don't end up with dead air. But if you're able to just sort of say, yeah, I mean, you can even use I have an idea, like, let's do this. And that can work. Or here's what I'm thinking, right? That's a good, strong one too. So that's it. And then let it happen naturally.
I like that I have an idea, because that still leaves it open for someone else to give input. But yeah, to kind of give a direction, but not necessarily try to control everything that's happening, is what you're saying?
Exactly. So the pressure is not really on you. It's more an opportunity for you to create something. And then you need to be receptive to what you get back. And that's kind of reminds me of some of the acting skills that I would use, in ad-libbing, right? It's like you have a concept, but you can't control the other person to say the right thing to get you to where you want to go. So you get to start it and you get to shape it, but you have to also be just as in tune with where the other person is at and make sure that, you're kind of responding to them in an appropriate way, right?
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of podcasting. You have to come in with a plan as a host, but you don't necessarily go through every single question in order. You don't just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the order that you wrote things down. You allow for nuance and flow the conversation to kind of direct itself into certain areas that you didn't foresee coming. And as a good host, like when I originally started out podcasting, I felt like I had to plan everything to a T. And now it's been about 90, 95 episodes where I recognize how important it is to kind of leave space in the conversation to come to fruition on its own.
100%. Yes. This is the basic fundamentals of relationships, communication. It's that dance of energy. And people who are too controlling are going to feel tight and rigid, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And people who are too absent or empty, they're going to be uncomfortable as well. So you have to try to strike that nice, even flow. And a lot of this is about harmony. There's all these sort of analogies to energy, but it's true. That's how existence functions. It's a give and a take. I talk about my last newsletter, I tried to sort of neutralize the topic when I was talking about like male and female. It wasn't a dichotomy, but I said we still sort of talk about like outlets and plugs as like the male and female end or up and down. Like we have these false dichotomies in our minds, the black and white thinking. But when you recognize that it's more of a fluid process, you're able to sort of see how these things function as a whole, how they're useful in totality, not just one or the other.
I wanted to bring up a pattern that I've noticed with my interactions with the opposite sex is that my motives seem to be questioned much more than I question women's motives. And I don't feel like I'm under attack all the time by women. I think a lot of guys are like give the impression that, like women are always asking these dumb questions or like I can't do anything without her asking questions. Like I don't feel like that at all. But I do definitely notice that my texts and some of the things that I say are being parsed apart much more than I would go through the effort to do. So I was wondering from your perspective and from the clients that you've had, what is a healthy way to respond to that as a guy without inflaming the situation?
Well, what do you mean by motives? Do you mean like if you're interested in sex or in a relationship? Is that what you mean?
I would say more like I send a simple, like something that I think is a simple text or like something that garners in my mind a 2 or 3 word response. Like she was asking a direct question and I gave a yes or no answer. And then she asked me, maybe later that night or the next morning, like, where are you mad at me or something? And like things that I think that sometimes women will look more into the deeper meaning behind some of the things that guys say when they just really mean how it's meant to be taken in a straightforward situation, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Generally women, I talk about this a lot, women are just much more neurotic creatures. Now, that doesn't mean that men cannot be neurotic and very sort of anxious ridden. They can, but it's a more...
Oh yeah, I've definitely been on that end of the spectrum.
Yeah,
sure.
when there's a lot on the line, men can get that way. But I mean, we call it mental strength, really, when it's men being a nervous wreck versus emotional weakness when women are an emotional wreck, right? So I think when men are like that, they're not being very masculine. Men are thinkers, but when they overthink, they disempower themselves. So generally, I do advise my male clients that women are very neurotic. They're very insecure. They're going to read into things. You have to reassure them. You have to communicate well and know how to talk to them so that you're not beating down their egos. You also don't want to flood them with validation either. So you have to strike the balance too. And know the more you understand women as a man, single man dating, the better you're going to be able to vet women and make them feel good and be responsive to you without having to, chase them or please them and bend over backwards to make them happy. So going back to the PUAs went way far down the other way where they objectified women and made them feel like disposable napkins. Whereas now we're trying to, create this sort of, I don't know, like the gentleman Chad or something, right? Where you realize that
Yeah, it's like the backlash of that.
Yeah, it's just a way to be honorable, but you're still confident and you still recognize that you have options, but you're not making women feel torn up inside and like they're used and abused and passed around or something. So I've heard it from a few men that I would say are respectable and confident and masculine, that they always say, if and when they're dating multiple people, that their motto is to leave every woman like a better woman after they finish their relations.
I think that's great. I like that mentality.
It's very honorable, but it's both. It's getting the best of both worlds, right?
Yeah, because you're not using them for any sort of purpose. And yeah, I think the whole questioning thing, like if a if a woman is questioning a guy's motives and maybe there's nothing there, it doesn't really do anything for the guy to be defensive, because I feel like that's how I've kind of been in the past, even though there was nothing wrong. Like I didn't have anything to worry about, just to like acknowledge what they're saying without turning into like a battle.
Yeah, thanks for bringing me back to the example. So, in what I was trying to explain too is the more you understand that's how women are, and you want to find women or a woman who is mature and developed enough that she's already learned how to regulate her emotions herself. She doesn't need you to comfort her every anxiety, right? She can do that work herself. But because
Hmm.
you're still young and you're going to be dating younger women, you're going to be finding women who are quite neurotic. So you need to see some level of reassurance getting internalized so that you can build trust with them. But that requires, especially in the beginning, that you do fill in the blanks for them. And you want to show that you're consistent and reliable, and you're doing what you're saying you're doing. So they may want to do a video call so that they see your environment. They know you're telling the truth. They don't see signs that,
Hmm.
whatever, that there's been girls around, or they want to make sure that your words line up with your actions and things like that. So it's definitely something you don't want to feel like you're proving yourself, but you need to build trust. So know the difference. And that can be difficult to figure out the difference, but
Hmm.
it's important to know, one, she needs to do the work to regulate her own emotions, but two, you also need to build trust. So you have to strike that balance as best that you can.
Yeah, the example that comes to mind is I was dating a girl long distance my senior year in school. So I was 20, 21, 22 at the time. And she was staying at the baseball house in Richmond, which I was renting a room in. And so I went off to practice and I left my laptop there and it was open. And when I got back, I could tell that this like something was off. And we were just kind of like sitting there. She wasn't really saying anything for an hour. And then she just said, I went through all of your texts on your laptop. And I didn't respond to that in the best way. And we were also long distance. So I didn't really take that into account. Like we saw each other once a month flying back and forth. So I could definitely see the insecurity of not being together all the time. And then I made a joke on top of it. And I wasn't, I didn't have anything on my laptop. I wasn't texting anyone. It was funny because she was like, you don't text anyone. And I was like, do you want me to text more people? Like, I don't know what you're getting at. And then I kind of made a joke. I was like, thank God that I locked my iPad. And it was a complete joke. And that set off like another whole argument. But yeah, looking back on it, I probably should have approached that more of like, okay, she probably is insecure about dating long distance and thinks that maybe something is happening. So I should keep that in mind.
Okay, well, she crossed a major line. That displays some very dishonorable behavior, and the fact that she would stoop to that. I think that's. I mean, it's understandable. Her insecurities were eating away at her, and maybe in the moment she just sort of did it, and then the Pandora's box was open, and she had to tell you. And so
Hmm.
at least she maybe handled it well as soon as that that choice was made. But to get to that point without having any type of communication with you is a bad sign, right? If someone is feeling that much pent up insecurity and they're not communicating to you and you don't realize it, then what else are they repressing, right? So what you would have to notice is it's almost like you have to turn on that parental, like paternal instinct and recognize this is when a woman is acting like a child, right? And so when you're parenting, and this is also true in the reverse sometimes with men, right? A woman, you don't want to have a woman who's parenting a man, and you don't want a man to parent a woman. But if you're going to pick one being correct, like more correct, a man sort of guiding a woman as leader is more appropriate, right? You just don't want to be in a relationship where you have to parent. So in that moment, you're basically separating her behavior from her as a woman. So you stay very calm, you're firm, but you're caring, and you're able to say, what you did is unacceptable, and I'm not going to condone that. I can understand that you're feeling insecure, and I wish you would said something so that I could have reassured you. But now we're going to have to rebuild this trust that was broken, because we cannot go forward with this. And then that sort of attitude, so that she feels shame for what she did. And you're not just trying to help her feel better or defend yourself or get angry or whatever.
That's what I should have said at the time. I think also I just had a lack of experience in relationships too, because that was my first serious relationship. And it was also long distance. And I think I just started joking out of a defense mechanism. Like I just was kind of laughing off. But yeah, I definitely right now, if that happened, I would definitely see it as a breach of security, but or just a breach of the trust. But at the time, I just didn't really see it like that.
Yeah, and you are learning. That's what relationships do, even if they're not serious and committed and monogamous and all that. Having these experiences with people are going to teach us. And you have to learn what the trade-offs are, because it's like you want experience to learn, but you don't want to need to have more experiences to be better, right? You want to get to a point where you compound those experiences internally so that you continue to develop yourself on your own.
Yeah, so I was also listening to some other of your YouTube chats, which I thoroughly enjoy, and you mentioned that 80% of your clients are male. And I was wondering, since statistically more guys watch porn than women, do you find any problems or connections, like problems with the quality of relationships that are connected with porn? Do guys really go into that with you? Is that something that's brought up a lot?
Yeah, actually, I work with several clients of mine that have had or are currently working through porn addictions and having success in abstaining from that. There was one that I got a permission to, I didn't say his name, but so the testimonial was anonymous, but he was, I think he's like 30 something. And so he's, ever since he was a teenager, maybe like 14, 15, he's been using porn daily, and it's been a compulsive addiction for him his whole life. So that's 15 or so years. And we just started working together maybe 3 or 4 months ago. And he's now down to like 1 or 2 single uses per month.
That's great.
And gaining like a lot of mastery over it as well, just by his mindset shifts, by basically becoming more able to regulate his own emotions, being able to stop the anxiety and that sort of cycle of, it's like self-soothing. And a lot of it's based on a fear / need for intimacy that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I was just interested because I actually quit watching porn about 4 months ago. And it was never to the point where it was affecting my daily life. It was actually more of a utility thing, because if I was watching porn, it was at night, and it just like the extra screen time. I was trying to cut down on my screen time, and after I was watching porn, and then I was going down the YouTube rabbit hole and Twitter, because like it's all on my phone. So I just realized, all right, the first thing that I do at night, if I am on my phone at night, is usually porn. So I'm just going to cut that out and see what happens. And that was great, because now I read before I go to bed, and then I just pass out way more easily. But I have noticed that, I'm sure someone else could explain this better scientifically. The comparison that I make to my friends when I'm talking about it is that, like, if you have a low tolerance when you drink alcohol, you can get drunk off of a few beers. Like, you can feel pretty good off of 2 or 3 beers. And since I've quit porn, I feel like the threshold for getting me aroused is so much lower, to the point where I just feel more easily aroused all the time, which is great. Like, I think that's a positive benefit of it, because I'm not constantly having like that porn stimulation and like all these images that are bombarding me on a screen. Basically, it's like if I want to see that, it has to be in real life, or I'm not going to see it at all.
Yeah, and that goes for almost anything, right? But I think for some reason it was really normalized. I just remember, Playboy and Hugh Hefner and Penthouse and all of those magazines really normalized porn in mainstream culture. And it got out of hand when the internet came on and people had more access, and there's lots of sex workers and all of these women who they don't even basically call it prostitution, but it's the same thing, whether it's cyber sex or whether it's physical sex. I mean, it's just a hot mess, right? And so I think when you're able to abstain from anything like that, that's sort of, it's almost like like you said, it's whether it's alcohol, whether it's food, sugar, anything bad, if you're relying on that for pleasure, right? You don't really recognize the negative effects it has until you stop doing it, and then you reintroduce it, right? Yeah. And then you see the difference between your tolerance and what has like a negative effect. And ultimately, intimacy is hard enough as it is. Like, why complicate it? Why separate it and make it dysfunctional, so that we have a whole sort of generation of people who are isolated and just not having relationships or sex. And yeah, I think that's obviously a very bad direction for us to be going in generally, right?
Yeah, it's kind of ironic, because you mentioned before, like, the whole feminist kind of free the nipple mentality. You would think that this would be the most sexually active generation of any generation before. But from everything that I read, statistically, people are having less sex, especially my age group, than they've ever had before, which to me is really interesting.
Well, someone posted this the other day. It was pretty raunchy, but he said, Playboys, oh gosh, what was it? It was something about Playboys are really just men who pass around the same broken women who think they get a lot of women or something like that. And that's true. And because the same statistics are used by people on the other side of it saying, well, women are the ones that are really controlling things because the women are really just choosing the top 1% of men to mate with, right? And so that's the case. That's what's happening is the majority of people are disconnected and dysfunctional in regards to relationships and sexual activity, and a smaller number are having more scandalous and frivolous sex, right?
So it's a small percentage of promiscuous women at the top that are basically having sex with a bunch of different guys, and guys perceive that as, oh, like, there's this like whole culture, or women are more freaks, or something like that, but it's only a small percentage of women. Is that correct? Like, most women are not like that?
Well, I know I did a poll on Twitter a while ago. It was almost like a year ago now, I think. I'm not sure. But it was basically asking women to anonymously and confidentially report their body count, right? And a lot of women got really upset because they thought my brackets were too high. And I said, well, listen, this is Twitter. There's only 4 options that I can put on here, and I wanted to capture as many as I could. So I put like 1 to 10, and then 11 to I don't remember what it was exactly, but some women were like, you needed to put 0 to 1, and then 2 to 5. And then I'm like, no. You guys might be the majority, but you need to capture and understand that there are a good amount of women that have well over 25, 50 and more partners. And it was interesting, the responses I got in the comments. There were women from, specifically, I remember it being Sweden. This woman said, thank you for putting this poll out, because I've always thought it was normal. In Sweden, most women, all my friends have had more than like 50 partners, and that's normal here. So it wasn't until I got exposed to American culture or whatever culture that I realized that that wasn't the case.
Yeah, no, it's like an interesting dichotomy of what people perceive and what is actually happening.
Right. So the whole point is to not assume that it's not a problem because statistically the majority is not promiscuous. The point is to say, what is the severity of the problem? And we want to prevent it from taking over complete majority of the human population. Like it's kind of like the coronavirus, it's getting bad, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't want to say, oh, it's not a problem because only 100 people have died from coronavirus.
Yeah, I see hashtag coronavirus every other day. And I'm just like, when is this gonna... Actually, there was an article about the coronavirus spreading in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. This is a tangent, but I live in Brooklyn. And so, yeah, kind of scared me a little bit. But the fact that it's coming over here and there's a prominent Asian community in Sunset Park and people are coming back. So, yeah, coronavirus is the real deal.
Yes, it is. And it is scary. And that's when we should be responsive. Getting back to dating and relationships, it's important for us to see the trends. So it is a significant number. It's the growth aspect and the pockets where you'll see like this girl from Sweden saying, well, everybody in her community was having high numbers of sexual partners and casual sex was normalized. I have a female client she lives in Berlin, and she's just describing how she's been single and not working for a while. So she's been going out a lot, and it's mostly like all night, all day parties, sex clubs, and nobody is trying to be monogamous. So in these pockets, it's the majority of people in certain areas are absolutely promiscuous. But if you take the global picture, like Asia and, India kind of even things out.
Yeah, going to sex parties every night seems pretty stressful. I would just be like, who here is trying to go to bed by 9:30 during the week?
Yes.
Maybe watch an episode of Netflix and pass out. That's my idea of a party.
Yeah,
during the week.
You see how that's I agree with you. I think that would be exhausting. But going back to like social waves, right? A lot of these things that have happened, they've all been reactions to the last thing. And that's where we're getting things wrong, right? We need to have a broader picture and see further down the road, have a long-term perspective, and try to even things out and create more balance. So we don't want to keep sort of jumping around from extreme to extreme. We want to learn from our past mistakes and learn from our past things that we did right. And being able to integrate both of those together is what's really important. So that's what I'm focusing on in my line of work with people, creating resolutions to healthier relationships or ideal relationships. So learning what's good about men and what's good about women and how to create those healthy, happy families and couples.
Something I wanted to end on is a recent tweet of yours.
Okay, I'm ready.
You ready? All right, here it comes. It is, quote, "If he genuinely likes you, he'll want to know who you really are behind the curtain. He'll listen and remember the things that matter to you." And that really stuck out to me because a lot of my friends from school that I still hang out with regularly in New York, both men and women, we'll kind of bounce ideas off of each other and say, I'm having this problem in a relationship, or like, what does this text mean? Like things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And when the topic comes up of, this guy or girl hasn't been responding to me, what should I do? My answer is always that if he wants to contact you, he'll contact you. If not, then just don't worry about it. And your tweet stuck out to me because it kind of hit home with the point that if someone really wants to know you, he'll make it his job to know who you are at a deeper level.
Absolutely.
Whether it's a guy or a girl.
Yeah. And again, like I've seen a lot of women pursue men, right? Even in my past, like when I was single, I can say, I wasn't trying to pursue men, but my behavior kind of communicated that I was trying to pursue them. And this is the disconnect, is that women like this don't realize that their assertiveness, which is a good quality in general, is translated in the dating scene as desperateness and neediness or pushiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the more that a woman, let's just like talk about women for now, like when the woman can sort of sit back and be, which is true independence really, is to just not care about the outcome, like not force the outcome. When a woman can sit back and not be passive, but just refocus on what's important to her and not come across as forcing the issue or pushy, then he has an opportunity to pursue. And if he is interested in getting to know her, now, of course, there's also the concern, like, well, is he want sex? Like, is he wanting sex, or is he really interested in me? And so I also try to help women figure that out as well. And so this is one way, is he's going to ask you questions about your life, about who you are, what matters to you, and get to know you, because men who are generally interested are trying to vet for an appropriate girlfriend or a potential wife, right? So they want to seek that out, that information out, and just they're curious that it's something that makes them feel good. And in reverse, men are going to want to do that too. Men are going to be sharing not so much like their emotions, but they're going to be sharing their ideas, because ultimately they want you to be proud of them. They want you to be impressed, and they want you to not to just sort of listen and blah, 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 whatever. Here he goes again. Like they want you to be enthralled by what he's doing and achieving and capable of, right? Like that's why,
oh yeah, we definitely need that recognition.
Exactly. So it goes both ways in different ways, but it's so important to just make sure that you slow down, don't jump ahead in the dating process. Let things have room to breathe so that you can see what surfaces to the top. Forcing things and rushing ahead is the worst thing for singles in the dating world, and less is usually more.
I agree with that. I think that as a third-party observer to many relationships, both functional and dysfunctional, I think that a common thread of the dysfunctional relationships is that they rush the commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's like a death sentence or anything on a relationship, but sometimes just as someone who's watching everything transpire, I think, these people have only known themselves for 2-3 months, maybe 6 months, and they're already moving in together or planning vacations together. I some things that just for me seem like it's moving too quickly. Like, how could you possibly know the person when you're still in the honeymoon phase, if that makes sense?
Sure, especially when you're younger. You can commit, like monogamous commitment to someone, but to commit to the relationship is a different thing. And I tease that out too, because how I say for women, you want to be exclusive if you're going to be sexually active. So it's a riskier position for women in the beginning. And that's also why they're more neurotic, because they have their virtue to protect, if you want, their femininity. They don't want to be slutty, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're more nervous in the beginning. They need to make sure your intentions are good. But then once the commitment happens, it shifts and the women have a little bit more positioning in that sense. So that's why it has to even out with a strong man to lead the relationship.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Auxoro. If you haven't already, please hit us with a 5-star rating and comment on Apple Podcasts. This helps us appear higher in searches, which means more people will find out about Auxoro. Other ways to help get the word out is telling a friend, tagging us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, writing a blog post, or supporting us with a donation on Patreon. We are a completely independent platform, and we're grateful for every listener who supports this podcast. Thanks for coming along for the ride, and I'll see you guys next time.